So yesterday, the conversation about the possibility of the pandemic starting from a lab leak continued when a report was published that confirmed that three of the lab workers in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the area where they were doing the lab where they were doing the gain of function testing, basically testing coronavirus in a lab and trying to mutate it and make it stronger so that they can study the virus. Three lab workers were hospitalized with symptoms very similar to COVID back in November of 2019. So about 4 months before this was officially declared a pandemic. And this is incredibly important, but I'm a little bit confused because I'm pretty sure that this information was out there, or at least there were some talks about people from the lab being hospitalized from back last year. And I really can't find that much. I can't really find sources on that, but this was a conversation that was had. But apparently resurfaced in the news yesterday, and it started this whole debate because, of course, like I talked about last week, there is mounting evidence and even more prominent scientists coming out on the side that it's very likely that this started in a lab. So just the information or the addition to the story that these three lab workers were hospitalized with basically COVID symptoms before the pandemic started. Again, it's just, you add that up and hey, I'm not going to make a definitive statement of where it came from because I'm just not sure. But all of the evidence, not some, not a little bit, nearly all of the evidence is on the side of it started in a lab and the pandemic, the COVID leaked from a lab. And in fact, anybody who's still repeating the idea or the theory that this started from some sort of wild animal and it transmitted to humans and then it turned into this whole pandemic, anybody who's still repeating that narrative, either they're lying, doing propaganda, or they're just repeating propaganda. Because there's that position at this point is anti-science. Like I discussed in the previous video, had this started in bats, like they were claiming it worked, like they claimed that it did, then first of all, there would have been some sort of evolutionary chain where you can trace the virus back to the species where it originated in, and you could follow the patterns of when it evolved and it became more transmittable among humans, and when it evolved into the virus that the COVID-19 virus pandemic that we know today. So there would be some sort of evidentiary trail, can't speak, that proves that. And this isn't just me making that up. This is this has happened before when people were tracing different viruses and different epidemics, because it's not unprecedented that a virus goes from being something that originates in a wild animal and transforms into something, a virus that affects humans. It's not unprecedented, but when it does happen, there's a trail that you can follow. And to this day, over a year since this pandemic started, nobody has produced the evidentiary trail of how it started in bats and turned into one of the most contagious viruses among humans in our lifetime. Nobody has presented it, that chain of evidence. And on the side of that this came from a lab leak is, of course, the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the province where the pandemic originated. they were testing coronavirus and on purpose mutating it to make it more contagious. That's an incredible string of events that it strains credulity to believe that they're completely unrelated. That this is the virus started in that area. There's also a lab that tests coronavirus, and they were on purpose trying to make it more contagious. And also, the lab that they were testing, it wasn't even one of the most secure labs in terms of virology and epidemiology. It wasn't even one of the most secure labs for testing viruses. So it easily could have leaked from the lab. All of those pieces of evidence, and then now you have the confirmation that 3 lab workers working in that very same lab and in province where it started had COVID symptoms and were hospitalized 4 months before the pandemic was officially declared. So if you're still hell-bent on pushing the narrative that this started in bats, like I said, that's anti-science, and you're just kind of being obtuse to the facts as they present themselves, and you just working backwards from your conclusion that it must have came from bats, and anything else is some crazy fringe conspiracy theory that nobody should believe. And I think that's just a silly position to take. Again, it's fine to say you can't just come out and make a declarative, definitive statement which way, one way or another. This is a very fluid situation, but everyone should be able to add in new information and let that affect their reading of the situation. And if you are being objective about that, there's no way you can see all this evidence, all this the prominent respected scientists coming out backing this theory, and you still aren't moved an inch. Like I said, the only way you can do that is if you're being obtuse on purpose and you're just working backwards from your conclusion. And this is a very big deal, because if this pandemic started from a lab, it completely changes the discussion about what is the biggest emergency any of us have ever experienced in our lifetime, a worldwide pandemic and an international emergency. Because it's one thing if you say it started in the wet markets, it started with the wild animals, and people who just didn't know better, they were just they didn't know that this could happen. The virus got mixed up with the bat feces or whatever, and it spread, and what could they have done? It's a whole other discussion if all of these deaths, all these hospitalizations, all of the devastation that have been brought upon millions of people around the world, it wasn't some act of God or some act of nature. It was because people were doing some type of dangerous testing that they should not have been doing, that was previously banned before Dr. Fauci went out of his way to reverse the ban on gain-of-function testing. So you have a group of people doing dangerous testing that they should not have been doing. And they were doing it in a way that wasn't secured. And because of their recklessness, it started a pandemic. And the people, and it's not like some randos doing it in their basement. These were the very same top public health officials who would later become the czars and the emperor god kings of the world during the pandemic that they might have been the ones to start. That is bonkers. If this story is true, if this theory of events is true, the cover up or the suppressing of the lab leak theory, that by itself will be one of the biggest stories of my lifetime. It is a damning indictment of the public health officials and public health organizations, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And it's also a damning indictment of our political system and the media, because none of them were telling the truth, like I said, during the worst emergency of our lifetime. And I really, my feeble brain is incapable of accurately describing how outrageous it would be if Dr. Fauci himself, through his direct actions, not only reversing the ban on gain of function testing, but then to go and fund the very same lab, the very same institute that caused a pandemic, and then for him to craft the response, the international and domestic response to that very same pandemic that he's responsible for. That is a level of mind-blowingness that I just cannot put into words. And for all the people who claim that they're worried about fake news and misinformation online, that's why we have to have all this corporate censorship of what regular people are allowed to say and put online, because we need to be so afraid of fake news. Well, a couple points on that. One, this goes to show you that it is a terrible idea to let oligarchs at YouTube, at Google, at Twitter, at Facebook be the arbiters of what is true information, what is correct information, and what isn't. Because they all went with Dr. Fauci's word as if it was gospel. They all went along with this origin theory that it started with bats, even though there was no evidence to support that, and all the evidence was in the opposite direction. They all went along with that and pushed it uncritically. The news sources that they boosted in their algorithms, the news sources that they show to billions of people on the planet on coronavirus, they would almost never recommend independent news, who some of them were right about this from the beginning. In fact, the Last American Vagabond, I believe, he got his channel taken down over this specific issue last year. He came out and went against the grain on this very issue of the lab leak theory, and he got his channel not demonetized, not suspended for 2 weeks. He got his channel permanently deleted from YouTube because of that. So again, this is exhibit 1,600,078 as to why we should not be trusting these people to make the decisions about what information you're allowed to see, because they get this shit wrong all the time. When they're not doing it on purpose and lying at the behest of the establishment and doing propaganda at the behest of the establishment, could be my interpretation of them boosting Dr. Fauci's lying ass. I don't think it was nefarious on behalf of like the YouTube executives controlling the algorithm and boosting like the World Health Organization and the CDC, but because any regular person, especially if you aren't that informed about propaganda and misinformation in the media, you would think, hey, during the pandemic, let's boost the authoritative voices of a doctor, right? But here's the thing. That might be your knee-jerk response, but what happens when the doctor is lying his ass off? What happens when that very same doctor might have been responsible for the pandemic? And then now you're repeating his words as if it's gospel. So again, we should not be allowing them to control the flow of information, because now they were the ones pushing this shit. And they, again, completely wrong, and there's no repercussions for it. And then, again, to the people who are so worried about fake news online that we have to be censoring everything and control what regular people get to post online about certain topics. If you are concerned about fake news, well, again, if this story turns out to be true, this is you just gave a major boost in credibility to all the people you call fringe conspiracy theorists. Because the people who were called fringe conspiracy theorists were the ones who were talking about lab leak for the last year. And it turns out they were more right than anybody. So, I'm not one to boost every conspiracy theory and believe any conspiracy theory. Some of them are true. A lot of them are true. But I do think sometimes people go too far. But even I will admit, I'm not even. It makes it a lot harder to strongly disagree with the more out there perspectives on COVID and the pandemic. It makes it harder to disagree with them because the more we learn about it, it seems the more that they're proven correct. So like there's this theory that the elites started this pandemic on purpose because for several reasons. One being that this pandemic greatly worked out in their favor, and a lot of the things like Naomi Klein describes in the shock doctrine, a lot of the things that they would not have been able to get away with before the pandemic, they were able to do under the cover of emergency. Of course, the corporate heists like the CARES Act. They could, as bought and owned as Congress is by corporate interests, there was no way in hell they could just hand out trillions of dollars to the elites, to the richest people in the country and their corporations. There was no way in hell they could have done that without the cover of emergency and pretending that that was a response to the emergency and a solution to the crisis. Even though it wasn't, it was just a money grab and a corporate heist. It gave them enough cover to get away with it, the robbery. So there is this theory, and of course with the increased government surveillance that started under when the pandemic started with trying to do the contact tracing and other things like that, tracking people's locations and things like that. All of these overreaches, these excesses, and then the even bigger crackdown on independent news, because what, we're gonna show some random person talking about coronavirus? No, let's only show the quote authoritative news sources. Let's only show Dr. Fauci. All of these things turned out to work in favor of the elite's agenda and advancing their agenda. So there are some people, again, I can't say I'm really 100% behind this theory, but there are some people who say, hey, it looks like this shit was done on purpose because the way that it shaped out, it was only upsides for the people who could have started this. So look, again, you can disagree with that theory or not, but the fact of the matter is, the more information that comes out, like I said, it's kind of validating that theory and that line of thought, because Dr. Fauci and the CDC have proven that they cannot be trusted on this during the pandemic. They were just making shit up. Of course, Dr. Fauci talking about the masks don't work and then he admits that he was lying. This isn't my words. This isn't my interpretation, my analysis. He admitted that he lied about the mask for some other bullshit reason, that he didn't want people to go out and buy a bunch of masks and there wouldn't be enough masks for doctors. He lied during a pandemic and public health emergency about the number one tool to stop the spread of the pandemic. That's what Dr. Fauci did. And the CDC was making up bullshit rules. You remember when they changed they said that, for a while, the social distancing was 6 feet. And then when they were trying to force people back into schools and force people back to work, they just randomly, arbitrarily cut it down to 3 feet. So, like, all of these institutions, they're shown that they're incredibly political and they aren't actually serving the public and humanity like they're supposed to. And so they are a tool of the elites that was proven during this pandemic. Again, it goes to the most extreme theory of COVID. Health officials can't be trusted. They lied about this the entire way, and the elites made out like bandits. And now we're learning that this possibly came out of a lab. So the point that I'm trying to make here isn't that I'm validating that theory and saying it's correct, but the point I'm trying to make is it gets increasingly harder to keep telling those people that they're wrong, when at every turn they're being proven more right than everybody else. And so if you're concerned about fake news online and people falling for conspiracy theories, well, the fact that these institutions that are supposed to have public trust keep undermining that public trust, and now we're in this weird state where basically none of these institutions, you can't trust any of these institutions. So when people start making up conspiracy theories, and people start believing them, that isn't on the people making up the conspiracy theories, and it isn't on the people who believe the conspiracy theories. That is on the crisis of legitimacy in these institutions. And that is entirely their fault and through their actions over the last few decades and over the pandemic too. And it really is mind-blowing. And like I said, this is one of the biggest stories of my lifetime, if this lab leak story is true. And like I said, it goes to show you how you cannot trust these institutions, because the CDC will make up rules and lie to the public when it suits them. The health czars like Dr. Fauci would do the same to cover his ass, because he might very well have been responsible for this pandemic. And he was put in a position of power where he oversaw the international response to that same pandemic. How can you tell people to trust a public, like the World Health Organization, or trust the public health institutions, when you have these massive conflicts of interest like this that go completely unchecked? And then the entire profession went along with that bullshit. It wasn't just Dr. Fauci. Nobody at the World Health Organization was pushing back on him. Nobody at the World Health Organization was calling him out for that gain of function, his supportive gain of function in that specific province where this pandemic started. Nobody called bullshit on that. Nobody at the CDC called bullshit on that. None of the quote authoritative sources in journalism, none of them called bullshit on that. So there's complete distrust in these institutions, and also with the UN. The World Health Organization is supposed to be this international thing for public health, but like I said, you see how politicized they are. The pandemic highlighted it, but it isn't just that. Where are they on other incredibly important issues related to the health of humanity, like pollution, like climate change? All those things have tremendous health effects on people. Where are they on the factory farming? One of the biggest sources of health problems here in the U.S. and in other places, the horrendous factory farming conditions and lack of regulation that causes huge effects on people's health. So it's not just COVID. Whenever it's inconvenient for these officials, these public health officials, to buck the establishment, to buck the elites, to buck like for instance the United States government, who they get a lot of funding from, when it's inconvenient for them to do that, they just won't do it. So again, it's hard to say trust them as these benevolent figures who just care about public health, when, like I said, if they cared about public health, they would be leading the charge on factory farming. They would be leading the charge on pollution and climate change, they would be leading the charge against the corporations, because the corporations are the ones they're the biggest danger to public health. And the governments that refuse to regulate them are also a giant danger to public health. And they won't say that. They won't go against the fray on that one. They'll just toe the party line. So again, it seems like they're just a propaganda organization for the elites in the medical professionals, or in the medical profession. And the same with the UN. Again, if it wasn't the World Health Organization who was going to call bullshit and actually speak the truth about where this pandemic started, it wasn't the World Health Organization. It should have been the UN. Again, this international body that claims to main goal is support human rights and protect humanity and things like that, regardless of political affiliation. Okay, so where were you during the worst emergency of our lifetime? None of them called Dr. Fauci out on his bullshit. To this day, they won't call Dr. Fauci out on his bullshit. And the fact that he's made this pandemic, not only did he make it worse in the US by lying about the mask and lying about other shit, but then he might actually have been the one who started the pandemic. Where are the people at the UN calling for investigations, calling for the research and the documents from the Wuhan lab? Where are they on that? They're not doing it because the Western governments, they don't want that pressure on Fauci. So they went this entire year pushing his bullshit narrative that covered his own ass, and they did it uncritically. So again, the UN, not really much of an organization caring about the good of humanity. It's just a political arm of the most powerful governments on the planet. And whatever they want, that's what they do. Again, if the UN was actually there to defend human beings and human rights from tyrannical governments or from whatever threats, where are they? They provided absolute, while the US is on a fucking imperialistic rampage around the world, setting the Middle East on fire, setting Africa on fire, fucking rampage through Latin America during the Cold War and with all our dirty wars and overthrowing governments and shit like that. Where has the UN provided any pressure on the US about that? No, because the US provides the funding. The US is the superpower of the world. So they don't want that smoke, so they go along with whatever the US says anyway. So like I said, these institutions have no credibility. And I don't want that to be the case. But that's what the evidence shows. So the story about the lab leak is huge. It's bigger than people are letting on, and we're gonna eventually there's gonna be more information, and how bad the cover up was. Again, it's gonna be one of the biggest stories of our lifetime. So I'll be following this story. If you all want to help support the show, I have the links to Patreon in the about page and in the description box. Same with PayPal if you want to do a one-time contribution. And we have officially launched the merchandise store for the show. On Teespring, so I have some pictures up on the screen, and I will also have a link to that in the description box. So if you want to help support the show, that's a great way to do it. Most of the support has come from the audience, just contributing what they can because they appreciate the content and basically paying me for the free content. And I'm incredibly grateful for all that because you guys help fund the show and you help support the show. But I understand not everybody might want to do that. So in this way you can support the show, contribute to the show, and you can get something in return. So you can get a t-shirt, you can get a mug, and the most important thing with the shirt is just, yeah, sure, it's a cool shirt to wear, but it's really just proof, I guess, of how much you support independent media by buying the merchandise and supporting independent shows like this one. So all that stuff's in the description box. Thank you for everybody who keeps showing up, sharing videos, liking videos, commenting. Yeah, so